So here is my Iron Man suit. It's about 95% completed. I've still got to do a few little things like the hands, put on the kneecaps, sort the shoes out. I haven't recorded me assembling any of this just because there are so many tutorials online that do the exact same thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through all of the individual components and just highlight any problems that I've encountered along the way and the solutions that I've come across, and how I've managed to fix them, and that might help some of you who are coming across the same problems. So the materials I used were 95% this. This is just floor mat. You can buy these in packages of 4. Well, I've been getting them in packages of 4. I found them at a shop at a discounted price, so I bought a whole bunch of them. It is all of this stuff, and I think this is a centimetre thick. I have some other stuff as well, which is slightly thinner, about 8 mils, and I've used that for some of the more bendy bits, say around the abdominals. These have been the things that cut everything out, pretty straightforward, just a whole bunch of these blades and a rule, and then just doing everything else by freehand. The chest piece was the first thing I constructed. Pretty straightforward. I've used a little Velcro tab here. I had to buy some extra strength Velcro because the stuff I had just wasn't cutting it, so that goes on here. Everything else is fixed in place at the top, so all used contact cement. It has come apart a couple of times around areas of stress, around the shoulder straps, and I think somewhere along the back here it started to come apart. I've been using this stuff, which is Time Bond contact adhesive. I went to the shops, I got some good stuff, expensive stuff, so I figured that would be, money well spent. This stuff has been awful. It's very tacky, it thins out it doesn't thin out, it's gooped up a lot. It's been awful, and I've done the vast majority of all of my construction using this stuff, struggling the whole way. And then I went to a real cheap shop and I got some of this, contact adhesive, which was about £2.50 or something, and this is just infinitely better. This is a lot gooier. This is like a fluid, a liquid, which you can just spread on nice and easy. And essentially all I do, I don't even use a spreader or anything. You just put it along the seam that you want to stick, and then I just use that. Spread it all on nice and thin. You let that dry. You do the same on another piece. Nice and easy. And if you get too much on there, you just wipe away some of the excess. You leave that for not even 15 minutes, you just leave it for 5-10 minutes, you stick it together, and it sticks really very well. Obviously I've just rushed that, but that will make a permanent bond. This stuff has been awful, absolutely awful, which is a shame because I spent quite a lot of money on it, but oh well. So going back to the chest piece, as I found that lots of areas, as I was putting it on and off quite a lot, testing to make sure it fits, some of the areas were pulling apart. So I've gone along on the inside and I've used hot glue everywhere, along all the seams, just all on the inside, just to give it that extra layer of support. Because the last thing you want is this just pulling apart. You probably noticed all this white stuff. We'll go over that in a sec. So this is the abdominal piece, which again I've Velcroed. This is the Velcro I had, which isn't very strong but does the trick quite nicely for the abdominal piece. I've made a few modifications to this. The template was made for someone a lot smaller than me, so if I was to scale this up when I printed the template out, everything will get wider as well as longer, which I don't need. I don't need it any sort of fatter. So all I could do really was have this additional layer, which I traced out and cut out and then glued on top, just to make the whole thing, the abdominal section, taller, essentially. And then this wraps around, it Velcros at the back. With all of these patterns, I've just used a wood burner. It's not even a wood burner actually, it's a soldering iron, but it does the same thing, and you just very, very carefully go all the way across. So all of this white stuff, this is all-purpose acrylic sealant, and that is just to try and minimise the seams, because there are some areas here where the seams are quite noticeable and you want it to be nice and flush. Obviously this looks quite messy now when it's unpainted, but actually if you run your finger across it, it doesn't look too bad. I'm being careful not to overdo it because I don't want it all lumpy and bumpy, but I think I might give that one more pass. There's just a few little ridges there which is still not completely flat, which I want to get rid of. And I want to show you how I connect this to the chest piece. So going inside the chest piece, just open this up. So inside I've got these clasps here, and then on the abdominal section I've glued in these on elastic here. Only cost £5, but all you can do is you just attach those on the inside, and then the whole thing sits together and has a little bit of elasticity, so when you're moving around it should stay put. And then you just put that all in, and there we go. That's what it looks like all together, and it stays. So I can give that a bit of a pull, and it holds it all together. So moving further down, I've got these little catches here. I saw this on another tutorial. I thought it was a very good idea. He had put his at the front, about here, but I figured because you want it to the pelvis to pivot, doing it the side was better. That was my interpretation. So here is the pelvic region. Again, this is the outside now, so all you have to do to attach it to the abdominals, grab the abdominals, that sits inside. This is actually easier to do when you've got it on your body, and then you just fasten that together, one on that side, one on the opposite side, if I can get it. There you go. And there we go. And then there's a little bit of pivoting around, so there's a bit of movement there, which is good. And that is the abdominal section. Moving on to the neck, this is my neck piece, which again looks very rough, and I guess it kind of is. So this was the slightly thinner foam I was using, which I think is about 8mm. I had this left over from another project. So I struggled to find a neck template. To be honest, I didn't want to pay for one. I did manage to find a free one online. It was a Kylo Ren template. It had the basic neck sections and then the Kylo Ren pattern on top. So all I did was just ignore the Kylo Ren pattern. I managed to find a pattern for the Iron Man template, which wasn't made specifically for this neck piece, but all I did was I cut out the paper pieces and I traced it on top, and I did my best to make it fit. Again, I was using the really crappy glue, and you can see just this stuff spilled out everywhere. It was awful. So there's I mean, some of these seams here, you can see it's rough and it's not very good, and it was really bad at the front, and as I was piecing it together, it all just kept coming apart. I ended up going in with super glue. Super glue dries very hard, so it's left all lumpy and bumpy and jagged. So it looked pretty messy. So that's where the acrylic has come in handy. I'm just slowly going over, trying to smooth this all down. Again, it looks bad, but actually it's feeling a lot smoother than it did compared to, say, some of these other ones here. So going into the mechanism at the back here to open and close it. I found a tutorial from Evil Ted. He used magnets, which was a very good idea. So I got some of these magnets, again, about £3, £4 off eBay. And they just snapped together. But then I found that they were, every time I looked down to the floor, they were kind of pulling apart. So I just went in with a little bit of Velcro. And then that just sits it all together. A little extra piece here just to hide the Velcro. And then I'm just going over it and I'm trying to cover these as best as I can. Again, I'm not very good at that, but I'm hoping once it's painted it'll look a little bit better. But that's the headpiece. Tiny bit of Velcro there just so it attaches to the front of the chest piece. So this goes in under the chest piece, attaches in near the arc reactor, and that will hold it. Although if I move around too much it just pulls apart, but maybe I have to come back and figure out a slightly more permanent way of holding that in place. So these are the arms, fairly straightforward actually. Lots of little fiddly pieces, but I think they look pretty good. So this was the second arm I did. The second one I cut down, so this is the upper arm by your bicep. I cut down on the inside, so this is the right arm. Just because the template was a little bit too snug around my arms. They do fit, but it was just, I didn't want to rip apart the seams too much. So this has got a little bit of give. I put some elastic in there, just a little bit, so it's got a bit of flex. I might do the same on the other arm. But this one seemed tighter for some reason than the other one, so I cut down there. The problem is the second you cut down, all the tensile strength, it just explodes and it just kind of pops apart. So it's a bit messy, but it's on the inside, so you don't really see it too much. Again, following the template, originally I attached the shoulder far down over here. Once it was on my arm, again, I guess my arms are longer than the guy who modelled this on himself, so the shoulders, they didn't reach the top of my shoulder. It was all too short, so I had to go back in. I bought some of this online, contact adhesive thinner, just applied it and just took my time with it, slowly pulled it apart, and then I was able just to re-glue the shoulder, just shift it up a little bit, and now it fits a lot better. Going down into the lower arm, I've got some Velcro and elastic here, Velcro attached on the inside, and the easiest way to do it is actually on your arm. You do it bent, so you find out where you want it to go, pop it all in there, and then, hey presto, that's your arm. Easy peasy, and you don't see any of that elastic either, so it looks pretty good. And I've done the same for both arms. Again, going around all of these seams. So the thing is, with the filler, you want some seams to be invisible, you want some seams to be sort of fairly visible, and then others you want the seams in because it's part of the design. So here, for instance, I'm trying my best to make these as smooth as possible. You really don't want any seams, they should be nice and rounded. And same here as well, that's nice and smooth. So these ones, I'm not too fussed that they're a little bit sharp and a little bit jagged. You want them to be kind of prominent, and the same down here on the forearm. I kind of want them to be prominent. You don't want them to be nice and smooth because that's not how it's supposed to be. But then on the back here, I want that nice and smooth. I want that as flush as possible. But these ones, I'm not, there should be a bit of an angle there, so I'm not too fussed about getting that perfectly rounded. So these are the thigh pieces. I had a real problem at this point. I think the glue was just, I don't know, starting to harden, and it just wasn't very good. I mean, in the can before I even applied it, it just seemed to be, the more I was using it, the worse it was getting. So I was really struggling with this, and I was using a lot of hot glue on the inside to hold it, going over every single seam with super glue, and then using a spray accelerant to hold it in place, so you're left with a whole load of crunchy seams. On this one here, you can see I've been going over trying to it looks awful, it really does look awful like this, but that's pretty smooth now. This was probably the worst bit of the whole build so far, trying to get this damn thing in there, and it was awful. I was using super glue, and I used a lot of super glue down here, and it was really very messy and very ugly and not smooth or flush or anything, so I've had to go in quite heavily with the sealant just to try and smooth it all out, and that's slowly looking better. That's pretty good through there. I mean, this is still a little bit rough, but it's a lot better than it was, and you can kind of see the difference between one side that I've done, and I might leave this one, to be perfectly honest, maybe just give it a bit of a sand. And again here, trying to make these nice and flush. I want these seams gone as best as I can. So if I show you the other side, which I haven't really touched so far, let's see, you can see here, this is what the super glue does. It makes this kind of, it's crusty and it's hard, obviously, as super glue is, and I used a lot down here, and it makes this kind of flaky, kind of crusty substance, so obviously when you paint that, it's not going to look good at all. A lot of super glue used along here. It's all pretty solid, but again, we'll go over, I'll seal it all up, and hopefully just make it look a little bit smoother. But this was considering it should have been fairly straightforward, there's only about 5 pieces that make this. It was so fiddly and awful, and this part was a real absolute nightmare, getting this section in here. It just didn't want to stick down in this part. Lower legs, pretty straightforward. This was actually around the time I got my new glue, and this went together so quickly and easily, and I was kicking myself for not getting better glue sooner. But you can see the quality of these lines through here. It's just smooth and fine, and there's just no problems at all like that. It's just easy. I've gone over some areas, and that's not because of the glue, that's because I'm just not very good at it. So again, that's now nice and flush, nice and smooth, and again here I'm trying to get rid of these seams. I want this to be one nice curved piece, I don't want there to be much seam if possible. So that one feels pretty good. This one's probably going to need another go over, and then maybe one more along here. And I just going by feel, because you can't do it by how it looks, because it looks awful. You just have to run your fingers over and see, like a little bit there, a little step there, which we just want to try and cover over a bit. So down here, I've just hot glued in a bit of elastic along the inside, so as I'm walking, it's got this bit of flex. And that's really the only modification on there, and I stole that from another tutorial, to be honest. I'll link all of the YouTube channels that I've used in the descriptions. And last we have the feet. Again, pretty straightforward. I think the idea is you put some elastic between the two areas and you slip your shoe in and it kind of clamps around your shoe. I think this is probably a little bit on the big side, so the idea is you can just slice a bit off. I mean, you could make them permanent, I guess, but when you're walking there probably does need to be a bit of flex there. I haven't tested these out in the sense of, obviously it doesn't have elastic, so I'm concerned that when I'm walking it might move up and kind of do this, or the other way around, that might kind of catch up. So I'm not quite sure whether it might be worth just sticking these together, or maybe just putting something along the bottom or on the inside there once it's glued, just so that it's still got a bit of give, but it's not going to go up on itself and catch anyway. It's a problem for another time. So this is my helmet. This was I think my first ever build like this. Actually, I've just noticed I've left this in a hot room and I think it's just starting to bubble. That's not good. Oh man, yeah, got to get this out. Painted and everything, so I had a bit of a practice run on this. I'm not going to be using this. What I want to do is to be able to make a mask where the faceplate comes off, but as we found, or as I found from the arm section, if I was to cut down here, if I was to make another one of these and cut down here, the whole thing would just kind of spring apart because it's all held together quite firmly. So we need to make a solid version, so I'm going to have a go at making a silicone mold and then a resin cast of this, so that I'll have a solid piece, and then I can cut down here with my Dremel, take it all apart, and then I would have two distinct pieces. And I might need to cast once for the red piece and then again for a gold piece, because what I might find is if as I'm cutting down here, I think inevitably one section is going to get damaged, so I might make two casts out of it. And then what I can do is I can have maybe make a mechanism which just kind of pulls up and down, or I'll just have a free faceplate and I'll use some of the magnets that I've used earlier, embed them in the mask so I can kind of clip it down here, I can pull the whole thing off, and then I can kind of clip it up the top and it will just sit in place. So that's the plan. So that's all of it so far. I'm not going to be doing a suit up video or anything just yet because there's far too much to do. Next step is going to be onto the hands. I mean, there's plenty of tidy up. I've got to go over all of the seams. I've got to really finish the neck up because that still looks pretty miserable. I'll go over the hands. I found a template online for that, and then I will show you the process of me trying to make a silicone mold and a resin copy of the helmet. I have no idea how that's going to turn out. I've tried once before with cheap alternatives, cheap ingredients, and that failed miserably. That's a video I made on my channel, so you can have a look at that if you want, where I went wrong. This whole process is basically just trying to figure out how have I messed it up and what can I do to fix it, so hopefully this will help you.